right, it's my pleasure to introduce my long-term friend, Ari Cartun. I think we came to Stanford about the same time, 45 years ago. As you can see from the handout, Ari has been, he is presently a Rabbi Emeritus at Etz Chayim Congregation in Palo Alto. Interestingly, it's the same name as the congregation at which the horrific murders took place in Pittsburgh a few weeks ago. In fact, the characteristics that were just mentioned about the Humanist Society really reflect the characteristics of Rabbi Cartun. Compassion, logic, science, reason, all of those things are very characteristic of him. I would recommend to you listening to some of his podcasts entitled A Rabbi and a Pastor Walk In. Doesn't say where they're walking into, but maybe he'll explain that. It's the beginning of a joke, right? But they're wonderful podcasts, often taking off on current events, like the Etz Chayim massacre, but filled with compassion and insight and wisdom that I would recommend to you. Anyway, without further ado, Rabbi Cartun.
That's for him. Can you all hear me? Okay, good. That's what I wanted to know. I'm going to be talking about a topic which is really appropriate for this venue. This looks like it's a hacker haven. It's a place for computer people. And I put together a book which we're selling now. It's called Mindware for a God Wrestler, Jewish Thought in the Age of Thinking Machines. So it couldn't be a more appropriate venue than a hacker dojo. I had no idea when Herman asked me to talk here that I'd be, I didn't even know what a hacker dojo was until I walked in, and then I kind of figured it out. What I wanted to say is that I write God with a zero, G0d, or in transliterations of Hebrew names like Elohim and Adonai, the O is a zero. This is for a couple reasons, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about the origin of it, and then focus on two aspects: the mystical aspect, Kabbalistic mystical aspect, and the scientific, mathematical, and computer aspects of using a zero to replace the letter O when you write God. Now, it came about by accident. If you can visualize your computer keyboard, typewriter keyboard, whatever it is, had an old Royal typewriter. And if you go to zero, I mean the letter O, it's right there. And if you go to zero, it's just beyond it. At the correct angle, your finger is pointing right at it. And one day I typed God, capital G, 0D. And I'm looking at it and I'm thinking, should I change it? And I'm thinking, I don't think I want to change it. I like that. And here's why I like it. I liked it for a couple reasons. First, because of a Kabbalistic reason, and second, because of a scientific reason. Here's the Kabbalistic reason. In Jewish mystical thought, before God is one, and if you know anything about Judaism, you know that our main motto is God is one. That is monotheism, one God. There's only one God. If there's a God, there's only one. But the Kabbalah looks at that and says, but actually, before that, God was nothing. That is, it's called the ayin, spelled with an aleph, not an ayin, if you know Hebrew letters. Ayin with an ayin means an I. Ayin with an aleph means zero, naught, nothing, zip. And so God is called ayin before God created the world. I want to give you a little bit more on this a little bit in a second, but I just want to get you to the concept of God being no thing. The word nothing in English means no thing. And so if God is no thing, I think that even people who don't believe in God can agree that God is no thing. Because thingness would imply a certain concrete and small aspect. When I say small, anything that we're aware of is smaller than the entirety of all of it. So for God to be a thing, that would be very small. That's the main Jewish historical critique of idolatry, which is that there's nothing that we can use, which is a thing, that can represent God. Doesn't matter what it is, it's too small. Now there are ways of representing God in words and in concepts, but any picture is doomed to fail. Unless you are a Christian and you're dealing with the life of Jesus, and for those who are up on Christian theology, and I am a little bit because I podcast with a pastor every week and we talk about these things, so I get all my questions answered from a really knowledgeable and friendly person. But she says that, and you'll see this, that Jesus was always God and always human. I know, I'm not going to go and defend that. I'm just telling you that if you make a picture of Jesus, you're making a picture of God. Even if it's Jesus, the human being. Okay. But anyway, I'm not dealing with that. I'm dealing with Jewish Kabbalah. And there's nothing you can do, no thing, that you can use to represent God. And so when I came across this accidental ring finger typo, I loved it. Because it allowed me to express that which I feel about God, which is that utterly, and in essence, God is no thing. So capital G0d. And this is kind of funny. Yesterday I was at a bat mitzvah at the congregation I am emeritus from. I don't know what the preposition of being an emeritus is, because I kind of orbit it. But in any case, I showed up at a bat mitzvah yesterday of a family that I know fairly well. And in our congregation, the students put out a commentary on the Torah portion. So they study one-on-one with the rabbi and other people, and then they write questions about the Torah portion and they have conversations about it. And then we print it up and it's edited. And our prayer book, which I'm going to pass around in a bit, spells God G0d. And they're still doing that. I mean, the new rabbi decided he didn't want it in the new High Holiday prayer book. You know, it's pretty weird, and I'm pretty weird. So, and people loved me, and so I got away with it. But not everybody could deal with it, so we thought, oh, there's another Ariism, kind of thing. Oh, the zeros everywhere, it's driving me crazy. But it's okay. But I was pleased to see that they're still spelling, at least this bat mitzvah girl and the editor of the commentary were both spelling it G0d. Now here is the way that you look about it from Kabbalistic point of view. Before God created, if they can say that, God was zero. God continues to be zero. God continues to be no thing. But in the world which God created, God is one. So it's a binary understanding now. Binary system is using bi, like in two numbers, two numerals, 0 and 1. And that's the way modern computers work. They're working on something else called quantum computing, which I'll get to at the end. But for the time being, 99.99999% of everything you do on a computer is all binary, using zeros and ones. 0 corresponds to the power being off. And 1 corresponds to the power being on. So if it flows through, that's 1, and if it's not flowing through, it's 0. And you'll see on a lot of the on and off switches that they're 1s and 0s. Actually, the 1s are from electric plates touching each other, so it's actually farther apart like that, just coming in. That's really the 1, it's the space in the middle. And the 0 is to show that they're farther apart and that the connections are not connecting. But anyway, 0 and 1. In this world, God is one. In God's own reality, God would be no thing. So I liked that. Then it also got me into the fact that I told you I'm writing a book on using computer metaphors to express Jewish thought and practices. I'm not going to give you the whole table of contents today, but one of the first chapters is why we write God with a zero, just so people have their questions answered right off the bat, because it does say Mindware for a God wrestler, G0d. God wrestler is another word for Israel, wrestling with God. All right, so, and Mindware is like software for your head. Yeah, you have a question? It's okay. It's okay.
Well,
this is very confusing stuff.
okay, I just want to say, I've been studying a little astronomy. Astronomers believe that before the Big Bang Theory, there was nothing.
I'm going to get there.
Yeah.
I'm going to get there.
That's kind of like zero.
So here comes the science part before the math part. I just gave you the computer part. Zeros and one, on and off. One of the things that has always confused me is that if you look at dimensions, you know, 1 dimension's a line, 2 dimensions are a plane, the top of your table, 3 dimensions are height, width, length, 3 dimensions, right? But it takes 2 points to distinguish a line, 3 to distinguish a plane, and 4 to distinguish height, width, and depth. So it takes 4 points to do 3 dimensions, 3 points to do 2 dimensions, 2 points to do 1 dimension, and what do you have when you have 1 point? 0 dimensions. That is, a single point is a dimensionless thing. It is 0. Now, here is how Kabbalah envisioned God creating, and this is also, it could come out of a cosmology textbook. Yeah, I know. I got to be careful. If I go in front of it, it's going to squeal. So I'm kind of teasing it. I just want to see how far I can get before it squeals. But anyway, if the science is correct, and it's still dealing with this stuff because we can't prove it yet. We can't see all the way back to that first second. The singularity, which means single point, out of which the entire universe grew. By the way, all these words don't make any sense. I'll tell you why in a second. But that was a single, 0, dimensionless point. And then somehow the universe expanded from that. It didn't expand into anything, because all of space was in that dimensionless point, which makes 0 mental image sense. You can't do anything with it to make any sense out of it. But that seems to be the way that current astronomy is dealing with the creation of the universe. But that's one of those little paradoxes, that is, a 1 point is a 0 dimension. So you have 0 and 1 simultaneously. Now, the way that Kabbalah understood this is that they asked the question, and this is a question that Aristotle also asked, and they both answer it lamely. Question: how do you take a perfect, incorporeal, non-existent in space and time God, and out of that God create an imperfect material world? If anybody thinks they're living in a perfect world, I don't know which one you're living in, but it's not the one I'm living in. So, this pile of crap in which we're living, on top of which we walk, how did this imperfect pile of dreck come to be if God is this perfect incorporeal phenomenon? And here was Aristotle's answer, and this is the Kabbalistic answer, because it's basically Aristotelianism. He said it in 10 steps. Doesn't help. Because the first step is still the hardest problem. How do you go from perfect nothingness to imperfect somethingness? And if you say you go in 10 steps, the first step is the hardest. And so the Kabbalah actually has an answer to that. It's still pretty lame, but it goes like this. The very first step was God's inclination to create. It was not a creation of anything, except the inclination, the idea, the desire to create. In any case, at that point, then you can start creating out of desire. That is, the world was created out of desire. And that desire became material. Okay. So, why do I use G0d? Because I like to focus utterly on the no-thingness of God. Accent in the funny place intended. The no-thingness of God. Now, that sounds like somebody who could also be called an atheist. I'm not an atheist. I don't believe that strongly. You have to be a very strong believer to believe in an atheist, to be an atheist, because you can't prove it. There's nothing you can do about God to prove anything. Because the problem with proof is you have to know what it is you're trying to prove. And since there are no commonly accepted definitions of God, you can't prove it. You can't disprove it either. Anyway, but using God as zero is important to me on that way. Just it gives me a chance to go from no-thingness to thingness. In this world of thingness, God is one. Now, here is an interesting thing, and I say here is spelled at H-E-R-E, because the phrase in which we assert God's unity is hear with your ears, H-E-A-R. And the question is this: why does it say, listen, Israel, God is one, instead of, look, Israel, God is one? Now, for those of you who are Torah scholars, you'll know that in the book of Deuteronomy, it says, look, Israel, 7 times, where it only says, hear, Israel, 5. So you would think that maybe looking is more important. As a matter of fact, if somebody tells you a story and you don't check out the data yourself, you're not a very good scientist. So you have to look at the data yourself. You can't just listen to somebody. But the problem with looking at the world and trying to deduce that it's created by one source and it is all made up of one source, a la Big Bang or a la Kabbalah, it doesn't really matter, is that you don't, I mean, how many people in this room? Well, you don't all look like one thing, even though we're all made out of the same ultimate, quarks and things, electrons. But even at the smallest level we can see, and Herman's a particle physicist, as he works at SLAC. He's got a atom smasher in Jordan that he, if you haven't ever heard Herman talk about this, I'd love to see this place. I was almost there. The fact is that even at the lowest levels, we can't find one thing. There's the atomic theory, as from the Greeks period. Atom means can't cut. So an atom means something you can't cut any more smaller. Atom. No cut. But when we get down to the lowest levels, we still find that there are all kinds of particles, called the particle zoo. There are just so many different kinds of things. So how do you see that God is one? And the answer is you can't. All you can do is listen. Hear, O Israel. I'm going to tell you something you cannot see and you cannot prove. That's why the Shema is the Shema, which means hear, instead of the Ra'eh, which means look. Look, you can't see that the world is one, but I can tell you the world is one, and you have to believe that it, and whether or not you're dealing with, like I say, the Big Bang or not, you have to believe that all this stuff came out of nothing. A single dimensionless point, which is everything we know that exists today. Now, which is the stranger story? Genesis chapter 1 or the Big Bang? And the answer is they're both pretty weird. And the more you think about them, the weirder they get. I mean, it's like, they used to say the 2 o'clock in the morning dorm question was, if you come to the end of the universe and open the door, what do you walk out into? Well, you can't do it, so don't worry about it. But in any case, the answer, the technical answer is nothing. because there is no end to the universe anywhere. And number two, it is all that there is. That's why they call it universe. So, a multiverse doesn't solve the problem. It's still all that there is, and there's still you can't get out of it. But, okay, have I blown your minds yet or put you to sleep? One of the two. So, I write God with a zero because I want to maintain my connection both to the Big Bang story and to the no-thingness of God on a theological level. That is, to the extent that I have a theology that understands God working. When God works in the universe, that's God as one. When God is in God's own reality, to me, that's God as zero. And out of that zero, out of that dimensionless point of nothingness, that the small inclination to create, everything came into existence. Now, there's another reason that I like to write God with a zero, and it's part of something. Everybody's got their own white whale. You know, we're all Ahab looking for something. My particular white whale was a prayer book in Jerusalem. I was in a hotel, and the hotels in Jerusalem, in the Jewish parts, have synagogues in them. They're not, congregations. They're just built, the rooms full of prayer books and a Torah. And I went down, I wanted to pray the evening prayer, and I picked up a prayer book, and it was the first time that I'd ever picked up a non-Ashkenazic prayer book. Ashkenazic is Eastern and Western European Jews. Sephardic is Spanish, Portuguese. Italian is a separate thing, but it's closer to Sephardic. And then there's what's called Eastern communities. And I picked up one that happened to be an Eastern community book. And they are, Eastern and Sephardic are all officially Kabbalistic, where Ashkenazic Jews are not. Some of them may be, but these guys are officially Kabbalistic, and they put stuff in their prayer books that we don't put in ours if we're Ashkenazic. And I picked it up, and I could not believe what was in it. The way they spell God in Hebrew, and you think Orthodox, right? It can't be different. You should see all the different kinds of Orthodox prayer books there are. They're essentially the same rite, R-I-T-E, but they have different things. I'm going to pass this one around. And if you can read Hebrew, you'll appreciate it. If you can't, it's still pretty. There are two places you can look. There's this first one here, which is the Shema. And one of the things is that they take the word Adonai, which we substitute for God's name. We don't pronounce God's name. We don't know how to anymore. And they put the word Adonai inside the last letter of God's name. And then the other thing that they do is they put definitions of God afterwards. If you can read that, that's also nice. But they make a Reform book out of it. Not that it goes along with the way that a modern American Reformed Jew would be, but they take a book and they redefine it by translating it. There are a lot of translations in there and commentaries, and they make it have. I collect these things. I've never been able to find that one prayer book again. I went down the next morning to see if I could find it so I could buy it, find a book store to sell it to me. I couldn't find it. It wasn't there anywhere. Looked all over the place. I knew where I put it back. It wasn't there. That's why it's my doggone white whale. So every time I go back to Israel, I go back to the Kabbalistic bookstores and I buy a new one. But I know it's never going to be there because I don't even remember what it looked like anymore. Yeah, it's 30 years ago. But I still want to find one. This is the closest one that I found. The other place that it has is two sets of pages, and they put different vowels under God's name. It changes every time. And they do this in certain places where there are a lot of God's names. Anyway, I'm just going to pass this around and take a look. Why do they do that? And the answer is because there are a lot of answers. I'll make the easy one. The easy one is this: because no matter how you encounter something significant, it's always a surprise. And so whenever somebody experiences God, if you say that, if you ask any kid in Sunday school, you say, "Where is God?" They say, "God is everywhere." Yeah, but you can't see him. Oh, where is God? I don't know. So experiencing God is different than making some kind of statement that God is everywhere. If everything came from God, if everything was created by God, then everything is a piece of God stuff, because God did not go to Home Depot to buy the things that God needed to make a world. God made it out of God. If God made the world, God made it out of God. And so everything that you're sitting on, everything you're eating, everything that's coming out the other end, Everything that we're breathing, every part of us is a piece of God. But it doesn't look that way. So the thing I like about these prayer books is they make God louder. How do you make God loud on a page? And the answer is by embellishing the word with a lot of different ways, and these are different ways to do it. So G0d does that as well. It doesn't sort of scream off the page, but it makes people pay attention. Or if we call God the source of life, zer0 of life, it makes people go, what is he doing that for? It's so weird. But it makes you think. And so in order to not let people just go by, this makes you think. Now, if you get used to coming to my congregation and see these zeros all over the prayer book, after, 15, 30 times, you won't see it either. It's like anything else. You get used to it. But the idea is to stop you in your tracks and make you think. Okay. That's step one. Now, if I ask, what does it mean that God is one? I like to go to this old Sunday school joke where a kid came up to the teacher and said, if God is one, who's two? And obviously the answer is, no, you're getting it all wrong. We're not counting. We're talking about only and all together. But that is the same as the Big Bang, as it were. How many Big Bangs were there? And in this local area, only one. If there were some sort of multiverse where, according to inflation theories, things are popping off, universes are popping off all the time, and I'm not going to go into detail as to why, because there are all kinds of different understandings and nobody can test it yet. But there could be lots of bangs going on, creating all kinds of different universes, but they're still within the same thing. So if you say multiverse, that doesn't change universe. There's only all that there is. There's all that there is, and there's all that there isn't. But there isn't anything that there isn't. So all we have is what there is. It's a lot of fun. I mean, the thing about language is you can just bollocks your head up and crazy. Now here's another thing, though. If you start with one, the other thing I like about G0d is it implies one. Because if something's using a zero, then somebody's going to think, well, what about the next number? Here's an interesting one. How did the universe end up with so many pieces if it started from a single dimensionless point and there's nothing else out there? It's not going into anything. Okay, here's math. There are two ways to get to infinity. 1, 2, 3, 4, right? 5. 6. But anyway, you can get to infinity just by starting counting integers. You can count anything you want, but the other thing you can count is fractions. So instead of going 1, 2, what if you go 1, 1/2? 1/3, 1/4, 1/4, 1/5, 1/6. That is, what if oneness became infinite through division instead of addition? Because nothing you can add to that single dimensionless point. If God is one, God remains one. There is no two. If the Big Bang banged, it banged once. It didn't bang again. Only the postman bangs twice. So, how did it get to be so many things? Well, you say, well, I'm looking at this, and I'm looking at this, and those are two separate things. 1, 2. What do you mean 1, 1/2? And the answer is, everything's relative. Just because it's being divided into pieces doesn't mean that it doesn't look different to us. Imagine if we're totally on the inside out. Because what we see, we know is not what is. What we see is what our brains and eyes approximate from the photons that our eyes are receiving as to what, and and the solidity we experience. But we know that the reality that underlies the impressions that we get is not the same as the illusions we live in. We know that. Now, they might not be too different, but the thing is, imagine the world being created into a multiplicity of infinities by dividing instead of by adding. And that, I think, also stems out of God spelled G0d. What is this multiplicity all about? There's some of you look like you may be a little older than me. Some of you might have been right there when Fire Sign Theater was doing its major thing, and some of you may have even heard of it. They have a very funny riff off of Zeno's paradox. Zeno's paradox is if you try to go someplace and you go half the distance on your first step, and half the distance on your second step, and half the distance left on the third step, you'll never get there. Because you'll always be some distance away. Now that might be fine for a theoretical scientist, but an engineer wouldn't give a damn and said, I'm just going to make the last step, what the hell. But that's Zeno's paradox. You can never get there if you're going to go half the distance every time. And what they do is they have a thing where a guy's going to get on the freeway, the Antelope Freeway, which is down in LA, and every time I pass it, I hear a voice going, Antelope Freeway, 1 mile. Antelope Freeway, 1/2 mile. Antelope Freeway, 1/4 mile. Antelope Freeway, 1/8 mile. It goes on and on and on like that. And it keeps on going in the background, and all these people are having a conversation. In any case, that's an example of how the world could be made infinite and created through division, by going smaller and smaller and smaller, and then turn the whole thing in and out, inside out, and it looks bigger and bigger and bigger. Now, there's one last thing, and then we'll go turn to total questions. The other part of writing God with a 0 that I really, really love is when you handwrite it. Now, if you're typing it, you'll find that even a capital 0 is smaller than a capital O is smaller than a 0. Most of the time, most fonts. But if you're handwriting it, you'll put a slash through it to show that it's a 0, it's a numeral instead of a letter. Now this, like this, is a symbol for a cubit. And I don't mean this kind of a cubit, which is the ancient biblical measurement from an elbow, which is what cubit actually means in Latin, cubitus, to your tip of your finger, about 1.5 feet. But a cubit is part of the next kind of computing, quantum computing. Quantum computing says, okay, we're going to take advantage of the probabilistic nature of the quantum level of the universe down to particle size, and we're going to show you that by not using electric gates in a binary way, on or off, open or closed, we're going to take the probability of various aspects of different particles and use that to store more data. Because if we do that, we don't have to store it as a yes or a no or an on or an off or a 1 or a 0. We can store it as both together simultaneously. Which means you use a whole lot less storage space and can access the answers more quickly. I'm not going to go into all what you have to do to make a quantum computer work, because I can tell you this, it is a whole lot of stuff. And even the most layperson friendly books about quantum computing are not that friendly. And I've read a bunch of them. And I understand the concepts, but I don't have the math to make it work, which is great because I don't agonize over it. But this is a symbol, when you use a G0d like this, of the quantum aspect of God. And here's the cool thing about it. And this is where I'm going to end up. One of the problems that people have with traditional theologies, doesn't matter which religion you are in, is that God is good. And by the way, in English, it sounds like it was written that way. God and good, you know. But it's not That's not true. And everybody knows, on some level, but they may not use it as a theopolitical slogan, that God is as bad as God is good. Why is that so? How many gods are there by policy? And the answer is one, unless you're polytheist, and then you have a special god for every need. But if you are a monotheist, then you only have one God, and if you say that bad comes from another source than good, then you have two gods. And that goes against policy. So, how do you do it? Now, sometimes I've heard bad is the absence of God. But there is no absence of God. That's also policy. And therefore, where does bad come from? And the answer is it comes from the same place as good. It doesn't matter what universe you're living in, with or without a God, bad things come from the same place that good comes from. And the answer is at one single dimensionless point. Everything good and everything bad comes from the same source. Boom. So what is that? And it's God. Now a lot of times, I'm not going to go into this we have a whole section on why evil happens. We call it the chapter Bugs and Bad Actors. But this shows that God can be good and bad simultaneously. God is 1 and 0. And so I can't do that. I can, but I can't do it quickly when I'm typing. I can get this symbol, but it's 3 fingers instead of 1. And so as a result, I don't do it. But were I to do it, it would get the point across even better. Because I'd rather use a qubit. By the way, qubit is short for quantum bit. Quantum from quantum physics, and bit meaning a piece of information, piece of data. And so this allows me to put all of my theology together. Let me recap. By the way, I'm going to send this one around too. This also is the same kind of stuff, but it says English. Here's the Shema, and then here is the Amidah, where the vowels under God change. It makes it easier. Here is what I think. Number 1, to me, God is no thing. But all thingness stems from God. The Big Bang started like Kabbalistic understandings of creation with a single dimensionless point of no thingness, becoming all thingness. And writing God with a 0 allows me to emphasize that. Writing God with a 0 makes God louder on the page and more noticeable. So people might pay more attention to it and think about it and think about the implications. And when you say God is no thing, then the implication you have to think is, oh, that means there's no God. That's one way to look at it. Probably very appropriate here. Another way to look at it is that God is not a thing. And the last things are that it allows me to combine my love of science and math with my love of the mystical experiences which I've had in my life, which you can't share because they're mine. I mean, that wouldn't mean anything to you. But between the kind of Kabbalah and mystic experiences and the rational approach that goes from the day of creation, but not before, G0d says it all for me. And that's why I do that. So, questions? Thank you.
Okay, remember, hold the mic like this when you talk. And also, somebody has one up. I'm going to just have to start in front of the room. Raise your hand if I haven't gotten to you yet. Start over here.
Thank you. So your interpretation of God that he or it, or I don't know, it's good, as good and as it is bad. This is the only logically consistent, probably, understanding of what God could be. But how could it help with morality? Because for many people, for religious people, they see God and the religious belief as the source of morality, the source of moral belief. So,
Good question. So repeat the question is, if God is also bad, then where do we learn from God to be good? And the answer is as follows. God's infinite and we're not. So we as finite, individuated things have to cope with our finitude and our individuated thingness and work together to do things well. All of the statements in every religion that apply to people say that we're supposed to do these things because they're good. They also say God is good, but the problem is when you say God is good, you have to avoid all the times when God is not. And that's a problem. But you're right. You cannot learn from God's examples all the time. Though there is a whole set of things that we do these things because God did them, like God fed the hungry and God visited the sick and God did this, that, and the other. And then that's fine. You can do that. Those are divine examples. But you don't want to say, well, like this is when God brought down fire and brimstone on Sodom and Gomorrah and let me show you how to do that. I mean, we don't want to do that. We already now know how to bring down fire and brimstone on each other. So unfortunately, we can do that, but we're not supposed to. So yes, the problem is when you believe that God is both the origin of good and evil, then there's no ultimate need to only think about, you don't learn that being good is a thing you do because God is always good. Right, it changes.
I'd like to point out that somebody who studied this claims there's something like a couple thousand religions, including the gods that go with them. I would also like to point out that I suspect we are here by pure accident. We are here by a cosmic fluke. The cosmic fluke is the boloid that struck the planet 66 million years ago, pretty well established. Now, what we know about mutations is that all of these dinosaurs and forms of life were killed by this boloid striking the planet. Now, so what we know about mutations today.
Let me stipulate that you don't need God to have a creation.
Well, let me finish my story. So,
is it a story or a question?
Yeah. So what?
No. Is it a story or a question?
Well, let me tell you something.
No. If it's a story, then no. If it's a question, ask it, and let's get to it.
The what?
If it's a question, ask your question, because there are other people who want to talk too.
You don't want the question.
I do. I want the question, but not the story.
I'm wanting to get your opinion about.
My opinion is that you don't need God for a creation, and everything you said is okay.
Well, all right. Forget the whole thing.
Hi.
Hi.
Oops. I just wonder what exactly is the definition of the Kabbalah. I'm not real sure about that. And also, if you have an opinion why it became so trendy a few years ago for people like Barbara Streisand and Madonna to be studying it.
Okay, Kabbalah is a word in Hebrew which means receive. And if you go into a lobby in a hotel in Israel, it'll say Kabbalah in Hebrew, but you won't, because that's the reception desk. Oh. So tradition has two aspects: the part you hand on, which is called Masoret, and the part you receive, which is called Kabbalah. Masoret is used now technically for transmitting the text of the Bible, and Kabbalah is used for the received transmission of mystical wisdom. And so Kabbalah has had a long history of development, just like everything else in Judaism. And it is, there are two aspects of it. One is the simple contemplative aspect of it, as a way to have a different relationship with God. And the other one is the practical aspect of it, which is doing miracles. And so there are a lot of people who found comfort in the kind of relationship with God you can have with the Kabbalistic understanding. And there are very, very, very few who think they can do miracles. And why did it get popular? There was a very enterprising person, Rabbi Berg in LA, who developed the Kabbalah Center and did outreach. And other people found out about it and did not restrict it to Jews. Streisand is, Madonna's not. And did not restrict it to people who know enough about Judaism to make the symbolism of the Kabbalah, which is definitely arcane, make it meaningful. Now let me just say one more thing about that word arcane. How many of you have ever had your tarot read? So I'm a tarot reader. I learned how to do it for another reason. It was interesting. But in any case, they call these, some of the cards are called major arcana, hidden things. And tarot is Torah backwards. Tarot, Torah. And it is a development of Christian Kabbalah. And I'll say Kabbalah is the Ashkenazic pronunciation, and Kabbalah is a Sephardic pronunciation. And the Christian attempts were mostly in Ashkenazic. They were mostly pronounced in Ashkenazic, because they were from Northern Europe, mostly. And so you'll find in these, if you buy yourself a set of tarot cards, or just look them up online, look up Kabbalistic references in tarot cards. Just look it up online. And there are all kinds of articles and pictures, and you can have fun all day. But that's where that comes from. And that's an example of practical Kabbalah that is telling people their futures. One of the interesting things about telling people their futures with tarot cards is that people work so hard to make whatever BS you say about them meaningful. I'm not kidding. I mean, people say, "How did you know that?" I said, "I'm just reading the cards." It's like, now maybe the cards are really cool, but what we find is, have you ever read a horoscope thing and say, and first of all, for those of you who don't know, those constellations don't apply to you. They're 2 months off. For the system was made over 2,000 years ago when those months had those signs over them, but now it's 2 months off. So you're not a Leo. You're a Libra. Doesn't really matter. It's total BS. By the way, BS to me is an abbreviation for baseless sanctity. And in any case, all this kind of stuff is, you'll work really, really hard to make it work, and so that's how that happens. You have a question, go ahead.
Do you think it's possible that when people became intelligent enough or conscious enough to wonder about where everything came from and how they existed, that they invented gods to explain it before we had science to explain a lot of it?
Now, that's the essence of a major critique of religion. So it goes like this: what we don't understand, we make up answers to, which is true. And the same thing goes with if you keep up to date on science. I'm not putting science down. I'm just saying that unfiltered, faddish, excited today science is on that level as well. We found something that works in a variety of... I started off wanting to be a chemist. I still have a scientific base. If you tell me somebody's been accused of a crime, I say, let's take it to court. Let's do the testing. I don't care what you say. I'm not very popular. I'm not a rah-rah, and I don't go along with the crowd. I want to know the data.
But science, that's what science does. It looks at data.
It does.
This is all made
It does. But it's only data as administered by people. So I'm reading a book right now called Chaos by James Glick. And what he's trying to show, and it happens all the time, and Herb will probably tell you about it a lot, whenever there's a new idea in science, it gets put down by the powers that be who can't accept it, and chaos was one of those concepts. And so you find people rejecting articles written by these people who later become lions in their field, lionized, because it doesn't fit the concept. So all I want to say is that science is, to the extent that it's administered by people, is still full of the same BS as religion. Religion is full of a lot of BS. The thing about science that's different is that science is theoretically self-correcting. And that's why I like it. You have more data, and then you rewrite whatever you thought it was. And one of the interesting things about science is that if you know the history of science, you know that the BS that people used to believe about germs and other things are just because they didn't have enough science. So yes, we're always putting answers out there to keep people from dying or killing each other before we have enough data. And it's equally bad in various sections of science. It's especially bad in areas of religion that do not look at data or reject data as being a Satanist plot to fool you into not accepting what some idiot decided the Bible should mean. No, because there are a lot of things the Bible says to do. They're fine, they're good, they're moral, whatever. And those people who think that the world is 5,779 years old are just not looking at data. And there's nothing in the Bible that says you have to think that. As a matter of fact, there are things in the Bible that allow you to very easily to say, no, that's not true. For example, just want to give you this good one if you have never heard it before. So how many days of creation were there? Whatever, 7, 6, whether the Sabbath was a day of creation or just celebration, okay. How long were those days? Were they 24-hour days? Were they 24-hour days? No. Exactly. On day 4, the sun, moon, and stars were created as time markers. Until that point, the word day has been used 3 times not to mean 24 hours. So it doesn't mean 20. No. All I'm saying is that there, not only does the Bible not tell you have to believe a certain age, but it's impossible to believe it literally and think that they were 24-hour days. That's the kind of thing I'm telling you. So there are a lot of things in the Bible that say you should do good things, and things that they say, here's capital punishment rules for particularly bad people, and we still have capital punishment rules for particularly bad people in this country, so we haven't gotten past that. But in any case, by the way, you should know that if a court condemns a person to death and that person is innocent and the person is executed, the court is a murderer. And that's one of the reasons that I oppose the death penalty, because I don't want anybody in a court to be a murderer. You can always fix a mistake somewhat as long as the person ain't dead. When they're dead, you can't fix it anymore. Next question. Yeah.
Hi, I come here and listen to all these talks, many of them, and I have a simplistic look at the way the world is, and I see it as the evil is would overshadow any thought there might be a God. The fact that that is overseeing us, and even any religion is debunked by evil. The problem is most of the people tend to be loving, and so we try to harbor ourselves away from this evil, but trying to explain it with religion is ridiculous to me in any sense.
Good.
So I don't know what to say beyond that, but thank you for that talk.
Okay.
Let's try to keep it to questions, please, if you would.
It's okay. I gave a very heavy dose of theology, and the mattress has to bounce back. So
you made a very good case for God being dimensionless and locationless, and the universe being quite different from that. And I'm wondering about your take on the human soul. I think Descartes proposed that the soul was also dimensionless and locationless, but separate from God. So, and I also understand that back in ancient times, this kind of dualism was not really there. So I was just wondering if you could comment on the soul as being separate from the body, and is the soul then separate from God, and how does that work out?
Let me just say this. I don't have any information upon which to make a reasonable statement about what a soul is. I don't have any data. People use the word a lot and imply that there is some sort of a transcendence of being that would go into another reality to be judged, rewarded, punished. So that is the typical way to look at a soul. I don't know what a soul is. I do know that there's another word, another concept that the word soul is used for, which means person. So the Bible will say, if a soul does this, it's like, oh, what's such a poor soul, or a lonely soul, or, there were 20 souls in the room. It's not distinguishing them from their bodies. It's just saying that there are 20 people there, or any person should do something like that. Because I don't have any data, I don't make any decision. What's different about Judaism, even in its orthodox forms, than Christianity or Islam, is that it's not, even though we do have myths about the next world, a next world, varieties of next worlds, they're not critical. You can say, if you do well in this world, maybe you'll be judged well in the next world, and it implies that there is such a thing going on. But there's no unanimity about what it really actually is and how it actually would work. And in any case, the Jewish reason to do good things is because they're right, not because of any reward. As a matter of fact, you'll find all kinds of different rabbis saying, don't do this stuff in order to get a reward. Do it because it's right. It's the right thing to do. So that's how I look at it. So I can't give you anything more than that, except for one thing. There is, in the concept of the multiverse, that is many, many, many universes sprouting off of each other, so that there is infinities of universes in the multiverse. If that's the case, then there's at least one multiverse in which everything went right for you, and at least one in which everything went horribly south. And that is my scientific understanding of heaven and hell. Because all these things are occurring simultaneously in time. One of the things I tell my students is that God is not in our time zone. Whatever time is for the ultimately holistic aspect of the universe, we are in it, but it's not in the same time. So it's all simultaneous. Therefore, there is a world in which I really won the lottery several times, actually. Big ones. But, and all of my 50 children were smart and above average. And, anyway, all that kind of stuff. So it'd be just, and none of them had any problems, and none of them had tooth decay, and it was just absolutely wonderful for my family in one universe. But that's about all I can get to. So I hope they'll understand that now you're seeing an example of where I let data stop me, because it's not necessary for me to have an opinion. Whatever is going to happen when I die, I'm happy with that. I'm not worried about dying. I just don't want the pain. So, yeah.
Yeah, just an observation. God exists because of humans. Science exists independent of human. And when you mentioned about the Big Bang, and you mentioned about zero, being a scientist, it was created because of the vacuum fluctuations. So it's a very different concept, and zero was invented in India. So before zero, and it's zero and ones are just concepts. So if you look at the wafer, p-n junctions, so it's a physical phenomena to humans use 0 and 1 to describe how the p-n junctions will work. So, and then you mentioned about the God being good and bad.
What's the question?
No, just being good and bad. These are human concepts. How do you relate to the other animal world? Well, and the eye is also evolved. Amoeba doesn't have eyes. So how do you explain those with respect to, because it's a God is a human creation.
That's wonderful.
So can you explain
Can I answer
good
it?
and bad? Because
Can I
good and
answer your
bad is
question?
also context to the human
Let me answer your
socialization. So
question.
could you please explain that?
First
Thank
of
you.
all, you're absolutely wrong when it comes about science. You're absolutely wrong when it comes to science. Science is a human endeavor just like religion. It's based on different things and it has different ways of operating, but it is done by people, not by dogs. I can tell you I have 4 dogs. Not a single one of them sounds like a scientist. They don't make those kind of thoughts. They don't make those kind of sounds. Science is a human thing. And because it's a human thing, the way we envision the world through science, in addition to backing up with experiment and combined observation, is we name it. What's a quark? A quark is a nonsense word invented by James Joyce in Finnegan's Wake. Why is it called a quark? Because Murray Gell-Mann liked that book. That's the human aspect of science, which has sometimes whimsy and sometimes incredible insight and sometimes other things in it. So science is as human as religion. Religion is human. Here's how I say religion is human. It's also divine. What created religion? The world. The universe we are in and are part of and our bodies are conterminous with is what created religion. Is there anything else that could have created it? Well, of course, it was John. Yeah, but John is part of the universe. Now, if you say that the universe comes out of no-thingness and nonsense, and there's no meaning to it, fine, live in that world. I don't like to live in that world. If you say the universe comes because somebody wanted not body, and not thing, because no thing wanted it to be, I like that world better. Now, it doesn't make any difference if I'm being holocausted by a world that cares or a world that doesn't care. I'm still dead and in a lot of pain and totally depressed. But it's both human and both universal. The universe creates itself. And all of the universe has created every thought you've ever had. And mine. Not picking on you. All of our thoughts are created by the universe. Because there's nothing else to have created them. And I can't even say, and one of the things about who came up with this idea first, whatever it was. And there may be somebody who published first, and there are all these things about people anyway. Who came up with these ideas? And the answer is, every single thing that the person who invented the thing, or named the thing, experience that led that person to that moment when they had an opportunity to recognize and name something and then popularize something. Everything. The steak they had for dinner the night before. The ice cream they really wanted all day. All the things, the bad words that somebody said to them the day before. All of that combines. That's all universe. So the universe, which created itself, created science and created religion. Now, what you want to put before the word created itself, that's up to you. Other questions?
Hey, any other questions? Raise your hand.
Did I win? No, I didn't win.
Well, each individual has got a complicated attitude and ideas about themselves and the world that are unique to them. And when you hear something that you talk about, or that Thoreau talks about, or the thing in the paper, they can make you see something in a different way. And so they have value for that. And besides, the Thoreau is beautiful.
I'm not quite sure I heard a question in there, but I do love the beret.
Oh, you're right. I should say a question. Well, why would you not admit these things, things from out of the blue, an LSD experience, a tarot? Why can't they be part of what you're saying?
They are. That's what I just said. Everything that anybody has ever thought and said is something that the universe created.
So why are you against things like tarot or something as ways of
I'm not.
Well, you did say that it's a lot of bullshit, as I recall.
No, baseless sanctity. I don't like to swear.
Well,
People elevating things to holiness that have no basis. That's why I use BS, baseless sanctity. I read a lot of literature. I read a lot of philosophy. I've read Thoreau, Emerson, the existentialists, transcendentalists. I've been all of those things during my lifetime. I came across most every interesting philosophical movement, and I tried it out. And one of the things I found out is that if you take me as a walking Venn diagram, I can basically Venn with almost anybody up to a point, but I just can't totally reinvent myself as them. So I come to see, and this applies to me as well, the limits of other people's thoughts and philosophies. And when I do that, I realize I'm picking at the edges. Because what's really cool about these people is the bold new vista that opened up when they began to think. But now, like I say, Thoreau, it's 200 years, and it's not as exciting unless you understand it. But it's still neat if you get a chance to re-experience. If you look in that prayer book, you'll find not every reading is from a Jewish person. There are non-Jews. I have Walt Whitman, who very much is I would say, would fit in this group very well as a humanist. And he had a tendency to use theological language at times. And I heard this from a friend of mine in a rabbinical school class, and this quote from Thoreau says, "I see letters from God dropped in the street wherever I go, and I leave them there because I know that others will come and go promptly." And I know what the letters say, because I've read those letters, and they say hello. And that's all I need, is the universe to say hello to me sometimes, and say, you matter. I picked you out. And that's fine. But that was my favorite part of Whitman. So I do accept these things from all kinds of people. I don't believe that Jews are the smartest or the only people that have good ideas in the world. That's just not me. That's not the kind of milieu I come from. Herman.
Thank you, Ari, for this very challenging, thought-provoking talk. I don't know that you've made many converts here.
I didn't try to.
But I'd like to suggest that one of the mottos of the Humanist Society, Humanist Association, is good without God. I think we can spell that with 3 zeros now. Okay. I'd like to consider making a pin with that. So thank you very much.
You're welcome. And thank you for inviting me.
Okay, I think, did you have a question? Okay, make it quick because we're getting to the end.
We have -2 minutes. It's okay, I'm setting imaginary numbers now, because you need them for chaos.
I want to rephrase a question that was asked a little earlier. Since every culture, every tribe, every nation has an assembly of gods, spirits, and other immaterial intelligences, isn't it sufficient evidence that these concepts are artifacts of the human cortex?
If you heard my answer to her, I already said so. That's not new. Everything is an artifact of a human consciousness. If you think that I'm sitting here telling you that I have been talking to some sort of extra universal source of knowledge who's been giving me fully formed ideas in terrific English, the answer is no, I didn't say that once.
Okay. All right, so let's give Ari a big hand for